Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of We're Not Fine.
Welcome back. You know, every once in a while, of course, we have these fun topics and then some serious ones. And today is a serious one.
I know. And in fact, it's serious enough that I changed from a cutesy vest with a ribbon to something a little bit more buttoned up and professional because we're going to be talking about signs you may have had an emotionally abusive parent. And we're not bringing it up because we want to stress you out or dig up old crap that you may have compartmentalized
or maybe we do.
Or maybe we do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of big on let's get it out.
And even if you listen to this and you're like, oh shit, I think one of my parents was emotionally abusive, the knowledge and understanding is going to set you free because then you can own, oh, this is why I feel the way I do, I think the way I do, I behave the way I do, it's coming up in my relationships. So
this podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
You know, there's this big kind of question that keeps coming up also, like, and parents also talk about it, but also kids talk about it, like, do I get to blame my parents? Fuck yeah, you do get to blame your parents, because none of us, I speak as a parent, we're perfect. And ideally, we respond to our kids as they get older and as they need to process maybe some events from their childhood or traumas or things they've never told us about. I can't tell you how many times in my practice, of course, and I'm sure yours as well, where we've been hearing stories about people who my mom and dad don't know that happened with a neighbor, or they don't know that this was going on within the same household, and that stuff. And that's why I'm not so sure I don't want to bring it up. Of course, we encourage you, if anything gets triggered in this or other episodes, by all means, reach out for support with a professional, with friends, with family, with supportive people that you actually have trust built up with to kind of talk about these things, because we all have them.
The goal isn't to like, oh, now I know who to blame and I'm going to stay there the rest of my life. Like, let it be an explanation for why you are the way that you are. And then as adults, it's our responsibility to figure out what to do with that and move to the next stages, which is like, there was just this, it was a book turned movie. It ends with us. It was really good. But the idea is we're the cycle breakers. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
It's our time. If we don't like the way our childhood played out, it's our responsibility to make sure that that cycle ends with us.
Well, and it's a really interesting thing, guys. So, you know, as a fellow parent, I wish all of you to, you know, be able to apologize to your kids and take responsibility for those things that did not go well. And I've seen some really, really magical relationships develop between parents and children as a result of that process. Sometimes it doesn't go well. Like, if parents are not responsive to getting that feedback, that can be tough. And I'm probably about 50-50 in my office.
Yeah. I mean, it's just beautiful to know that there's somewhere to go from the knowledge, from the discovery of it. There's also an amazing book that came out called, what is it? Like Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which I feel like is a really compassionate way of maybe describing emotionally abusive parents. So physically abusive, it's obvious. You know if someone has been physically harmful to you. Emotionally abusive can be a little bit confusing, especially when a parent might be making you feel like you're the sensitive one or you're the crazy one. So we're just going to dive into these are the signs that you may have had an emotionally abusive parent.
First one we're going to talk about is having a moody parent. And you know what that speaks to me of is a dysregulated parent, a person who is not aware of themselves and their body and their emotional state. They are maybe reactive versus responsive as a parent. They are quick to lose their cool. They're quick to jump to conclusions. They're quick to say things they don't mean. They are trying every way they can to kind of shut you down emotionally. And you know what's interesting about that is, again, ideally in a situation like this, parents take responsibility, but an overly moody parent naturally means that you're not going to feel necessarily safe all the
That's
time.
right.
People have asked me many times, how is it that I just got asked last week, actually, was I born to be a therapist? I don't think I was born to be a therapist. What I think happened, though, is that there were times in my life where I became vigilant and kind of what I call scanner. I think any of us who grew up with moody or unpredictable parenting situations naturally scanned for safety or scanned for our parents' status to kind of decide how to behave, like whether to retreat to our room, go back outside, or engage in some way. And I will say that I learned to read people really well because I didn't always have safety in my childhood home. So I kind of scanned and always kind of became aware. And now when I work with people, as many of my clients will say, like I'm looking through them because I'm really just scanning quickly for all of the pieces of their experience to understand who they are and work with them.
Well, and I mean, one thing that I think about when you talk about that, Doug, is the idea that it was an adaptive coping strategy for survival
For
at the
sure.
time. And it's up to us as adults to figure out, is it still like, are we still hypervigilant because we're still at war? Or how do we convince our nervous systems that we're safe now? But it's just, it really does change your wiring when you're born into abuse or trauma and you have to be walking on eggshells. The second sign is that they were overly critical or negative towards you, which is something that I don't think anyone would think about, like, wow, that's emotional abuse, right? But it's just this idea, if you have a sense that your parent is just only tuned into everything you're doing wrong or what you could be doing better, or they see the worst in you, or they're not celebrating you and not delighted by you, but they're just really critical. You'll notice if that inner dialogue carries with you, and then you become really critical of yourself, maybe, and other people. And that's all about the self-talk. And we can work on that too. That's like another thing therapy is amazing for, is to have better self-talk.
Well, and if all of those negative messages are consistent growing up, of course we internalize that stuff. We start to believe those things.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about my experience as a hockey dad, and
Mm.
watching some parents who are like, "Great job, you did a great job," and really
Oh,
encouraging, and then others who are like, "I can't believe you missed that. I can't believe you let that puck get past you or whatever." And I remember just being kind of mortified by the range of experiences. And I was kind of a new parent, as my hockey friends would attest to. And it was kind of an interesting thing because I was so excited to watch my child learn to skate and use a
yeah.
puck and their stick. I'm talking really well about this. I'm a huge
Me
hockey
is
fan now.
hockey dad.
Me, hockey puck, stick man. So here's what I would say, though. I watched some parents just really, really hard on their kids. And, some people would say that made them a better person. I remember there was a professional football player whose mother got kind of called on the carpet for what we would mostly consider a physically abusive disciplinary action. And he said it made him a stronger person. I call bullshit on that.
Oh,
Getting hurt and getting abused physically and emotionally is never a positive thing. It just isn't. It doesn't drive you to be a better person. It doesn't drive you to feel good about yourself. It doesn't make you a better partner or parent yourself if you haven't recognized how to regulate those emotions and, again, respond versus react, which is a big phrase that I use repeatedly.
I'm also just thinking about the idea that, like, was it the person that was abused that was saying it made him a better person, or
Yeah.
the parent?
The abused person.
Which, it just breaks my heart, because that's also, like, some would say that someone taking ownership of their own narrative and saying, like, I'm not going to blame my parent for the rest of my life. I'm going to just go with the narrative that I am who I am despite or because of, right? Oh, it's just painful to think about the stories we tell ourselves to just make peace with
Yeah.
the abuse.
I like what you said, Talia, about, changing the narrative to make it work for us. Like, it's very easy for me to say, I'm really grateful for my background because it's led me to be successful in my career, but the
Right.
path was not easy.
Right.
And it wasn't fun to grow up in that environment. It wasn't fun to have a mom who was overly reactive and threatened to leave or abandon or would get upset at the drop of a cup on the floor, as one of the examples. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I think one of the things that has been a challenge for me, and I own this, is that being a parent myself, like I've had to take a look at, like, did I carry on some of those characteristics? And I think when I started parenting, I have 2 kids, 12 years apart. I think my older got the brunt of some of that stuff for sure.
Before you did
Oh, for
your
sure.
work.
Before I did my work.
And that's
for
why
sure.
we've got to do our work, because in the absence of us really taking a cold, hard look in the mirror, we're just going to parent like our parents without actually making any intentional change.
I'm also aware, as we talk about this, what a very profound discussion this is. This is core to so many people's therapy, because I go through family of origin and inevitably I find stuff, right? So anyway, next category, they invalidated or dismissed your emotions. I have a lot to say about this. I think that, when people are not heard, or their emotions are unsafe, or people were told not to cry or to express themselves, this whole awful comment from the past of children are to be seen and not heard. What a backwards phrase that is, and what a backwards mantra that is.
And so damaging.
It's really damaging, because kids should be seen and heard and have a safe place to express their emotions and their thoughts and their wants and needs and all of those things. And when those are reinforced, we grow up into full-fledged adults that are ready to take on the world. If, however, we were invalidated, if we were criticized for those emotions, if those emotions were shut down, I find oftentimes that people develop what is known as an avoidant attachment style. Like, the ability to really be vulnerable with someone and trust that you won't be rejected and abandoned is a really huge risk.
Like, it's just too scary.
It's way too scary. And these people have a hard time developing true intimacy as a result. It's a really damaging component.
It is. And even like what I've realized in parenting, that if we want to give these parents who might be emotionally abusive or might be emotionally immature the benefit of the doubt, sometimes the reason why parents will dismiss or make zero space for their child to have thoughts and feelings or negative emotions is because we as parents are dysregulated. And if our child has negative emotions, we're so triggered. We just need them to not have any negative emotions. Maybe, again, it's back to the intergenerational cycle of, if we're parents who our parents dismissed and minimized, we have no capacity to sit with our child's negative emotions. So if we're talking to you right now, like, give yourself a little love, and also enough is enough. Like, make space for your child to have negative feelings. And if you find yourself triggered, get a therapist. That's what we're here for. That's the whole point of it.
Well, and, as a final note, we've referenced several times on this podcast, the connection to your body is really important. So if you find yourself feeling anxious, if you find yourself, and we're going to get to anxiety in one of these pieces, the thing that I'm struck by is, if you find yourself like getting riled up, or you find yourself anxious or stressed out, or your voice is elevated, or your voice is more pressured and intense, take a second and just try really hard to be in the moment and listen and try to understand what your child is saying to you.
Agreed. So the next one is, your parent was overly anxious, right? Does that mean that they were emotionally abusive? No, but it is a part of the, like, maybe there was an undiagnosed, untreated mental illness, or just like a lot of us have anxiety. I feel like it's like 1 in 2 or 3 has depression or anxiety. The next one is being passive aggressive.
Oof.
I know. And we in Minnesota are especially known for this terrible trait. So this is when you don't tell someone what is really bothering you. And you're sort of pleasant on the surface, but then there are these jabs, these biting little side comments that come out. It is actually a sign of emotional abuse, even though innocently, to those of us that might have those little snarky side passive aggressive comments, it just feels like I'm trying to keep the peace. But secretly, I just really want this person to know I'm displeased. I see right through them. I know what they're doing, and I'm going to make them feel badly about it.
Well, and the antidote to, passive aggressivity is to use I feel statements and to own what's going on for you emotionally. So if you just,
Yeah.
find yourself being passive aggressive, say, okay, I'm going to redo this. You get a redo, right? By the way, you get to redo this as a parent. We're talking about parents, by the way, and then we're talking about kids who kind of take this on and intergenerationally, like you said before. The reality is if you just start using I feel statements and it's direct, as scary as it might be that you may not be heard or trusted, the reality is, it's really critically important that you start using those ownership statements.
I have this couple that I am obsessed with.
Yeah.
And just this last session, she was talking about how she didn't even realize she would be passive aggressive. And so she put it out there as like something she was working on to her child and to her husband. And that's another, in our last episode when we talked about like sometimes I can't believe how non-defensively people can take feedback. That was one of the situations. So she's just like listening to people say, oh, that was passive aggressive. And she's like, ew, I don't want to do that. Okay, what's the unmet need? Like, I'm going to speak the unmet need. I really hoped you would, or I was thinking you would, or I need you to. And their relationships in that family have improved so much.
It's interesting. There's a lot of, you referenced it as well. Like there's a lot of maybe stereotypes that people in the Midwest are passive aggressive. I think people are passive aggressive everywhere. I think in general, and, I've been accused of, people have asked me, you must not be from here, because I do believe in very direct, honest, open dialogue about whatever you're experiencing. And I think there should be nothing off that table. So I think though, owning it and using those I feel statements is one way of getting through that passive aggressivity. And again, I think it's pervasive across cultures and this crazy United States sometimes. Next one, they were overly anxious. I think, one of the things that has been so striking about people coming into my office is that oftentimes they'll have trouble in their interpersonal relationships. And I'll say, so you're coming off as very anxious. There'll be pressured speech. People are not necessarily breathing well. They get really upset at a drop of a hat. And so, we'll talk about that. And it's been incredibly helpful for some people to have a name to it and to be able to identify, that's what's going on for me. I'm anxious. Here's the problem. Like if we take that anxiety and stress and we're just not patient with our kids, because kids are fallible. Kids are going to do things that are impulsive. Kids are going to spill things. Kids are going to do all kinds of things that if we're anxious and we're really not very resilient to those moments, we're going to react instead of respond.
Being human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be really harmful because if you're always worried, like I'm not going to get a safe, responsive interaction with my parent, of course, you're not going to do that. So it's really unfortunate. But knowing your mental health is the piece. And of course, anxiety can be a very diagnosable and treated thing.
Right. And it's like some of these things, we're talking about them as therapists, as looking back into your childhood, if your parent was emotionally abusive. But like some of these things are just untreated anxiety and depression and not learning skills. Next one, they guilted you. Okay, that's also like an old school parenting technique of maybe like a martyry vibe, or I wouldn't have done this if you didn't do that, or I've given everything up for you and you're so ungrateful. And, isn't that an old school parenting vibe?
I think it's not only old school, I think it's really distorted. These kids have not chosen to be brought into the world. So once we bring them into the world,
I sacrificed my well-being for you and I'm mentally ill because of you. Not a good parenting move.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And I think it really speaks to people who are unhealthy. And what I think about all of these scenarios, it's not about you. It's not about the child in these situations. It's about the parent who is doing something that is maladaptive or chronically abusive, to use this term that we're talking about. But it's up to parents to parent well. You're not responsible. I have a buddy who constantly talks about, like, I was responsible. I was a bad kid, and that's why my parents did what they did.
Oh, God, that breaks my heart.
Isn't that awful?
Yes.
So I just find myself thinking, and I keep going after him, like, that is so silly.
Yeah, it's like your parents' responsibility to be regulated.
Luckily, this person has kids of his own, and so I get to use that against him. Like, I know your children are responsible for everything you've done, right?
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But like sometimes that's what it takes to wake up and just be like, oh, are my children responsible for me being an emotionally healthy person? Are my parents or are my kids responsible for if I lose my shit? No, like we're supposed to be the padded cell to their crazy town. That's like literally welcome to being a parent.
That was an interesting reference. of an insane asylum.
It was probably not very therapist-like.
They gave you the silent treatment. So I do think that parents sometimes should take a moment, if they need to calm down and respond to their kids or address an issue. But I think never coming back to something and leaving kids unfulfilled about something that they've shared with you as a concern, or an area that, something happened where they were distressed by something. Giving the silent treatment is incredibly hard for kids because they start to get anxious and they start to feel dysregulated themselves. And kids need to be soothed. Kids need to be taught how to be soothed. So I think, in the case of a parent that gives the silent treatment, it's punishment. And it's shaming and blaming. And boy, do kids learn the message like, do not bring up our concerns. Do not bring up our thoughts and feelings if my parent's going to give me the silent treatment. Because again, it's punishing and it makes them unavailable for the support and soothing that you actually need.
And then you don't have the skills you need in your life to be vulnerable and say hard things because you're expecting to be punished. And it's cruel.
Right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up in a relationship where that's also either something that you do to somebody who has something hard to say, or if you experience that in your relationship now. Oh, psychodynamic, man.
All of it.
All of it. So they were physically present, but emotionally absent. This one, I think about, you had all of your needs met in terms of like shelter, food, school, hockey, art, whatever. You were parented, you were clean, you were warm, but there wasn't really a there. There wasn't really like your person that you could decompress at the end of the day or process or confide in, or you never felt like there was someone who had your back that you could really lean on emotionally. For maybe they were punishing or they were, I don't know, all the things.
All the things that we've talked about. I think we generalize that men are not socialized to be emotionally present and hug and talk about feelings. And I think that's changing. I do. And I'm grateful for all of the men who have taken that leap to change that cycle that they grew up in. I grew up in rural Minnesota where there was a lot of suppression, lots of people who didn't identify. What's funny about this conversation is I have found myself periodically thinking I did the opposite. I think I overcompensated with my kids as a therapist, and I'm into their stuff all the time. And I have been wanting to know their thoughts and feelings, and I check in all the time. And there's been times that I think, I bet my kids would have done better with a little less of that. Not to the extreme
what we do. We
I know.
Overcompensate. And then our kids end up with other issues. But at least they won't be the issues that we had.
And I am sorry for that. That's what I want to say out loud. So, that's exactly right, though. I think, and there's times that I just think, what would it be like to be a dad that just kind of came home after doing a hard day's work, brought home the bacon, so to speak, put a roof over their heads and a blanket on their bed, but
and
didn't necessarily check
enough.
in. Yeah, it would be just the weirdest thing. I've never been that person. I couldn't be that person.
No.
But sometimes I think because I overcompensate, I think my kids would be like, that would be nice.
That'd be nice to just have a little of that.
Just a little bit like, quit looking at me that way. Like my younger really got it really well when they said one day, is that a therapist question or a dad question? I'm like,
oh my God, that's so good.
It was really good. I don't always know.
One and the same.
Yeah. I remember saying, I'm not sure.
That's really
But if you don't want to answer me, that's okay. Because if I think they're in a bad mood, I'll be like, I think you're in a bad mood. Like you seem irritable. And they're like, shut up.
Because
I get to
you
have a wide
probably
range of emotions.
And also it's like, that's what happens. You come from a place where no one was attuned.
Yeah.
No one was checking in.
So
Nobody
I'm overly tuned.
Reflected. I know. So you're doing the tuning for a whole generation.
Which is a whole nother topic, by the way, an episode about how we are impacted as adults, how we feel about ourselves from an emotionally abusive parent situation, the choices we make in partners as a result of that. I could go on and on about that one, maybe another time.
How about next week?
Maybe.
Because that is literally our next week's topic, friends. So this is like, holy shit, I might have had an emotionally abusive parent. Did they see themselves that way? No, probably not. They just maybe didn't develop the maturity or the skill set, or they were unregulated and they were undiagnosed and unmedicated. Whatever that was, And this is actually why Doug chose this topic to begin with, is like, now what do we do with it? So next week, we're going to be talking about like, okay, now we know, and how did it affect us? And how do we tackle some of these issues and learn the skills necessary or notice ourselves?
Which, when we don't have a guidebook, which we'll talk about, like, it's really tough to do because you have to learn it on your own and you have to stumble a bit. Anyway, we'll get into that.
We hope you found this valuable. It's a really important topic, and we love making these conversations accessible to all. Find us on social media, Instagram, Dr. Talia Jackson, douglasljensen with an EN, and We're Not Fine Pod. We're also on YouTube. Look up We're Not Fine. There are like the full-length episodes, the little shorts that Alex does such a good job with those. We are on TikTok.
I'm wearing little shorts right now.
We're always business on top, and then you don't even want to know what's going on the bottom.
You don't.
Better not to know.
You know, it's interesting too, and I can't quite let go of this topic. It's a really big topic. And if you have found yourself thinking, I probably did have an abusive parent, the question, like, what do you do with it? Again, tune in for next week's episode and we'll talk more about that. We don't want to leave you out on a ledge related to all of this, because once you realize this, there can be a lot of reactivity. There can be a lot of grief. You can second guess yourself. You can start to internalize, like, why didn't I know this before? We'll talk about all that, and you're not alone, which I want to bring us to our website, we'renotfine.com. If you have any comments, questions, if you want something answered specific to your experience in this or other episodes, if you have other questions for us, by all means, feel free to anonymously or personally contact us there.
Bye, guys. We'll see you next week.
Take care.